Could a single entity be responsible for a multitude of our own paranormal experiences throughout history? Rosemary Ellen Guiley went out to research the Gjinn Connection, and we'll talk with her about that in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Noory. Honored tonight to have Rosemary Ellen Guiley with us. She is also, of course, our co-author with our book, The Talking to the Dead. She's written one called The Gjinn Connection. Rosemary has worked full-time in the paranormal and metaphysical field since 1983. She's a consulting editor of Fate magazine, publishing also her own newsletter. And here she is back on Coast to Coast. Rosemary, how are you?
Hi, George. Busy as ever. It sure is great to be back on the show.
Yeah, you sure are. You're everywhere. You were also a guest of mine on Beyond Belief. You did a great job. People are still sending me emails about your performance on that program.
I can't wait to see it.
I know. It's coming up. It'll be on a Friday. And, of course, if you're looking at it, you can also record it and keep it and look at it forever, Rosemary. Anyways, this is a fascinating subject. I talked a week or so ago about the Gjinn, but they just seem to be cropping up more and more. Give me your explanation on just what the Gjinn might be.
They are a race of supernatural beings who are attached to the earth. They were here on the earth before us. And, in fact, they had dominion over the earth, which they lost to us. They live in a parallel dimension. In earlier times, people believe they lived underground or they just retreated to very remote areas. But in modern terms, it really makes sense as a parallel dimension. They have access to our world, and there are those among them who aren't very friendly toward us. They're not all bad. They're not all good, just like human beings, but some of them have a lot of hostility towards humans. I believe, based on my research of years and years tracking these entities throughout the paranormal realm, that they account for a lot of our negative experiences, hauntings, possession, entity encounters, and also abductions, including the ET abduction phenomenon.
All right, we're going to get into all this. Now, the Middle Eastern folklore of genies popping out of the bottle and things like that, are they tied into the Gjinn?
Absolutely. That's exactly what we're talking about. The word genie came from the term Gjinn, which means the hidden ones. They've always been kind of hidden from people. They don't want us to know what they're doing. But when old Arabian folk tales, which are collected into a body of works called the Arabian Nights, when those were translated for the Western audiences into French and English, some of the French translations translated Gjinn as genie. And that's actually kind of a corruption of the term genius, which is a Roman spirit of place. So Gjinn is really the correct name for these entities, but they became embedded in our popular culture as the genie in the bottle.
Where did they come from, Rosemary? How'd they develop?
There are different stories about their origins. One very ancient Arabian legend says that they came from the winds. They were literally primordial wind spirits, and they were often responsible for ill winds that blew, bringing in disease and bad luck. In the Quran, they're explained as pre-existing humans created from a substance called smokeless fire. So the Gjinn have really no known form, no physical form that we can identify with. But they have the ability to shapeshift. They can shapeshift into human forms. They can shapeshift into animal forms. They especially like to shapeshift into weird forms that are sometimes half animal, half human, or combinations of creatures.
Could they be fallen angels, Rosemary?
There are a lot of parallels between the bad Gjinn and fallen angels. For example, the Quran tells the story that the Gjinn lost their place in this world and in paradise because they refused to bow to humans when God created humans. At the beginning, there were angels and Gjinn. Then along came humans, and God issued the instructions to the angels to bow to the humans, his new creations. The angels did. The Gjinn, who had free will, said no, because these new entities are inferior to us. And so they were pushed out in consequence. And the angry ones then become the evil Gjinn who follow a leader named Iblis, whose name means he who is despaired. And The jinn all have to leave, and the bad ones then torment people, and they are granted a reprieve until Judgment Day to prove their case that human beings are unworthy. So the jinn are like humans, the good, the bad, and the ugly. They have different motivations, different intentions. They have their own factions of terrorists, just like humans do. And we interact with those angry ones. We can also interact with more benevolent ones, but I do believe that most of our interactions with them are negative because these are the ones who are making the effort to act out against human beings.
How do we know we're not being tricked? If we interact with the benevolent ones, how do we know they're really not the evil ones?
Well, sometimes that proves to be the case, and we see this a lot in entity contact experiences where an entity starts out as Mr. Nice Guy, even assumes a human-like personality, and then once they have an attachment to a person, they turn, and they become more manipulative, controlling, negative. They can really wreak havoc with a person. Throughout the literature on jinn, going back centuries and centuries, when they are described, they are most often described as vengeful by nature and very deceitful, that they're untrustworthy. And so even if we think we're dealing with them in a positive way, they might be able to turn the tables on us at any time.
Rosemary, the fact that folklore and legend talks about the jinn so often, what does that tell you about the real possibilities that these entities might be real?
They are real. I've had encounters with a variety of entities over the course of my research, some of them positive, some of them ambivalent, and some of them quite hostile. And I believe that the jinn, comprise quite a hidden portion of our entity contact experiences. They masquerade as other entities that we know by other names. We might think we're dealing with a demon when we're really dealing with jinn. There's no way to scientifically prove these entities, but we have hundreds and hundreds of years of persuasive anecdotal experience where people describe the same sorts of experiences over and over again around the planet throughout time, the same core experiences with certain behaviors, certain characteristics. That says to me that we clearly have had interactions with otherworldly beings from the time we first came on this planet.
You know, when people get possessed, could it be, the evil jinn that might be doing that, or is that a demon of some type?
They do have the capability of possessing people and animals as well. Many times I think we're dealing with jinn in possession cases when we think we're dealing with demons. I've often been asked, well, how do you know the difference? Because if the jinn can act in demonic ways, how do we know whether or not we're dealing with demons or with jinn? And oftentimes it is hard for experts, investigators, people who do exorcisms and releasements. It is hard to know the difference. Many times the jinn are very difficult to cast out, and they often have very selfish motives for attaching to people. They want something for themselves. It's not a spiritual battle for the soul, but more a takeover for their own purposes. They will, however, absorb and use soul energy.
What causes them to show up in someone's life? Do they get conjured up by the individual? How do they show up?
Sometimes they do come because people have either deliberately or even unwittingly called them in by experimenting with magical practices or sometimes even spirit communication. They're often attracted to people who make the wrong decisions. They want power. They want control. They want wealth. They want to manipulate people. And these people then become easy manipulation targets for the jinn because many of them like to sow the seeds of chaos. They can also be attracted to people who have weakened defenses. They're in poor health. they're in emotional trauma, and these sorts of emotions seem to be a source of food for a lot of opportunistic entities. I think also they watch us. They might track individuals or families for generations and monitor them for how they might be useful to them.
Do they take physical form, Rosemary?
They can. They can appear as real people. They can acquire forms that are solid, that can wrestle with people and grab people. They can be very beautiful. They can be very monstrous. It depends on what effect they want to have on the people they've targeted.
Now, when they interact with human beings and they come through these various sources, I assume they can also sneak through a Ouija board, can't they?
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, some of the negative entities that show up frequently on Ouija boards are quite likely Gjinn. I believe that the entity known as Zozo, who is a negative entity particularly associated with the Ouija boards, Zozo and various other Z names it goes by, that Zozo is a Gjinn.
Where are they in terms of in the cosmos? I mean, are they in a different dimension? Are they in the bowels of the planet? Where the heck are these things?
In lore, they live underground. They like remote areas, caves, tunnels, wastelands. I've encountered them in remote areas in America, especially in areas where there have been a lot of mining operations. But from a modern perspective, they exist in a parallel dimension. We have a number of dimensions that are in our universe, which really is a multiverse. These are all connected to Earth. So they have a tie to the physical planet of the Earth, but being in another dimension, they are at a different vibrational rate in their natural state, and so we don't see them or encounter them most of the time. They're sort of around a corner, so to speak, but they are capable of coming into our world when people call them in, or they find thin spots, these portal areas that are all over the planet where the boundaries between dimensions are very permeable.
If you were to see one of these things walking down the street, what would it look like? What would it be wearing?
Nobody really knows what the true form of the Gjinn is. In ancient lore, they favor forms like snakes, reptilian forms, animal forms, black dogs. But one could walk down the street and we might not even know it. According to ancient lore, however, that even when they take beautiful human forms, there's something about them that gives them away if you know what to look for. I think that there are these beings moving around on the planet. They don't seem to have the capability to stay for long periods of time, but they do come and mingle with us. And there are even hybrids. I do believe that we have a variety of hybrids that have come onto the planet, and it's very difficult to tell them from us.
These forms that they take, different animals, things. I saw, for example, remember the movie The Omen?
Yes.
Was it a Rottweiler? What was it? That kind of dog? It was a Doberman or a Rottweiler?
It was a Rottweiler.
Yeah. Would a Gjinn do something like that?
Yes. They will take whatever form suits their purpose. They're famous, for example, as black dogs, and black spectral dogs have been in folklore all over the planet.
Sure have. With red eyes, too, right?
Oftentimes with red eyes. I believe they account for a lot of our mysterious creature encounters, these creatures that should not be, the monster birds, the animals that seem to be composed of 4 or 5 different species, or monstrous sorts of animals. People often encounter them when they're out in remote areas, and they have a surprise when they're camping or walking down a trail. These might be forms of Gjinn.
What do they want, Rosemary? What are they after?
They have a variety of motives, just like human beings have a variety of motives. Some of them are on a campaign of terror against us, and literally they want their homeland back. They want the planet back. They want to have dominion over it again. Others are interested in tormenting us for their own food source. They get energy off of us for their own amusement or entertainment. Some of them actually become infatuated with us, and they want to attach to people and follow them around and even have romantic relationships with them. Some of them are tricksters. So we have a variety of agendas going on, but the concentration of our engagement with them seems to be in the negative arena. When we have persistent hauntings that are very troubling and draining to people and cannot be resolved, certain possession cases, and many of these abductions that we've attributed to extraterrestrials, I believe the Gjinn are major players in all of these activities. Whether or not they account for them all, it's hard to say. I have talked to researchers who say, look, it's all Gjinn. They account for everything paranormal, all the aliens, all the ghosts, all the spirits. In my own research, I can see a major presence of the Gjinn, but I haven't become convinced myself yet that they account for everything.
In ancient Irish folklore, they talked about leprechauns. Might they have been Gjinn as well?
One of the startling things about my research, comparing Gjinn to other entities, was the similarity between fairies and Gjinn, and including leprechauns in that. In fact, there are so many similarities in terms of their origins, how they got pushed out of the planet, where they went, what their abilities are, how they interact with people, what their strengths and weaknesses are. It's possible to say that Gjinn and fairies are probably one and the same.
Well, we know all the stories about leprechauns, don't we? This would be fascinating if they were indeed one in the same, doing whatever they do.
You know, a lot of our Celtic ancestors, which is where we get most of our fairy lore in our culture from, they were frightened of fairies. The fairies were beings with tremendous powers who did not hold human beings in high regard, and you wanted to stay out of their way. We find a similar pattern with the Gjinn. Now, there are benevolent fairies. The fairies like us, they're not all one or the other. We tend to want to make things all good or bad when we look at the spirit world. We want definitive explanations and descriptions, and those are very difficult to do when you're dealing with entities that morph from one shape to another. So I do believe that there are many beneficial fairies, and many of them are willing to work with people, for example, to cultivate amazing gardens with plants that have a very high spiritual vibration that can be used in medicine. So it's a very varied picture.
Not many people in the West, Rosemary, would be familiar with the Gjinn. Now, if you said genies, they'd think of the TV show I Dream of Jeannie or Sinbad or something like that. But not many of them would know what a Gjinn would be. Would you agree?
Absolutely, George, and much of the rest of the world is very familiar with the Gjinn. They just didn't make it onto our paranormal radar and our culture. They got subsumed into the folktale and fairy lore, the genie in the bottle, and consequently people think of them as a fantasy, as something silly and quirky and goofy. That's how they're often portrayed in television and films, when actually outside of our culture, the Gjinn are known as their real name and their real powers, and they are regarded with a lot of respect and even wariness. So,
Rosemary, when we come back, I want to see how you put this connection between Gjinn and shadow people and even ET abductions. We'll be back. Rosemary, this connection between the Gjinn and ET abductions, shadow people, tell me about the connection.
I was led into the ET abduction arena through shadow people. I started researching shadow people almost 10 years ago. In 2004, I started getting a lot of emails from people spontaneously from all over describing terrifying bedroom visitations by these dark figures that looked like they were made entirely of shadow. They had solid form to them when they wanted, yet they could disappear through walls. They looked like the silhouettes of tall men wearing coats and often hats. And so in 2005, I decided to launch a formal study project to figure out what these entities were, because they defied categorization. They didn't seem to be ghosts. Even though they seemed to be evil to people, they didn't act like demons either. What were they? And so I collected hundreds of anecdotes from people, testimonies about their experiences, and began breaking them down into patterns, what the entities look like, the conditions in the experiencers' life, behavior, etc. And I discovered in the course of that many of these shadow people experiencers were also ET abductees or had significant encounters with entities or major sightings, but the abduction theme was very prominent. And I haven't run into that with a lot of other entity contact experiences to such a degree. So it made me wonder what really was going on. So some simultaneous things happened. I concluded after years of studying the shadow people that they were Gjinn, that this is a major form taken by Gjinn. And they also have a presence in the ET abduction scenario. I went back through the abduction literature, going back to cases from the 1950s. I talked to abduction researchers. I found evidence for shadow people throughout the abduction literature. And yet, connections between the shadow people and what was going on in the abductions were never quite well made. They were considered to be just, one of those side phenomena. They would often precede abductions, sometimes by weeks, months, even years. Abductees might start with shadow people experiences in childhood and then later on go into the full-blown abductions. The shadow people weren't often coming along with the abducting entities, but they seemed to be an advance guard. So there was a definite connection. If shadow people are a form of Gjinn, and the shadow people have a major presence in the ET abduction phenomenon, then that means the Gjinn are heavily involved in that. They might be working in cooperation with other entities. They might be working in conflict, in competition with other entities for us. They probably shapeshift into other entity forms so that we think we're dealing with the Greys, for example, or with reptilians or with a host of other forms. Sometimes these are one-off forms. They look more like beings from a fairy book than what we would associate with visitors from outer space. I believe the abduction scenario is not really an outer space thing anyway. I don't rule out that we could be visited by beings from off-world planets,
right.
But the evidence for it being an interdimensional experience is much stronger. These are entities really coming from dimensions attached to Earth. And these sorts of observations and conclusions have been in the ufological literature for some time, but the Gjinn have not been present. So in writing the Gjinn Connection, and I did go into this some in The Vengeful Gjinn, which came out a couple of years ago, my purpose here is to bring the Gjinn to the attention of the Western audience, and especially to investigators and researchers, and say, here's an entity that's active in these kinds of experiences, and they're not on our radar. We need to know about them. We need to factor them into our analyses, our considerations, because that's going to determine how we can respond to these, how we can protect ourselves, how we can end things, how we can ward things off.
Rosemary, if they're coming from other dimensions and they're not strictly physical, and they're abducting humans, doing biological experiments on them. What the heck do they want?
One of the themes that's come out in the ET abduction literature, which applies to Gjinn as well, is the hybrid program. We have all of these abductees who say that they have been taken for the sole purpose of their reproductive material. Female abductees have talked about being impregnated and having their fetuses removed. Mm-hmm. They have sometimes been reacquainted with the hybrid offspring. They've been told various things. One of the stories is that the ETs need our genetic stock to replenish their own stock because they've become depleted. I believe there's a darker thing going on. I don't think the abduction scenario has anything to do with the best interests of human beings or raising humans into any sort of spiritual awareness. It's abusive, it's manipulative, and it victimizes us. These are not benevolent entities doing that. Well, the Gjinn would have such a motive as well, for if they have a faction of them that want to come back into this world and anchor in on a more permanent basis again, they don't seem to be able to acquire a form to do that. So one of the ways to do it would be through a hybrid, where you could incorporate the genetics of the dominant species on the planet and merge that with your own abilities and raise those hybrids in an environment that would be have allegiance to their cause. This is what the ETs are supposed to be doing, and this would fit a Gjinn agenda as well.
So if I'm hearing you right, Rosemary, you're saying the Gjinn might have been responsible for just about every kind of activity on this planet that people have assumed might have been extraterrestrial.
They have a finger in everything. What we don't know is what is the extent of their involvement. Are they the majority of our experiences, some of our experiences? Does it shift around? As I mentioned a little earlier, I have consulted researchers all around the planet in different cultures from different religious perspectives, and there are some who say the Gjinn account for everything. And since they are hidden, and they really don't tell us what they're doing, nor do the abducting ETs. They're not being, those entities aren't being honest with us either. We don't really know. And it seems like we don't want to deal with it. We don't want to think about it. The abductions are fringe things that happen to fringe people, somebody else, when actually what is going on affects all of us. If we are the victims of a Trojan horse sort of campaign, at some point that's going to turn against us in very unfavorable ways. One of the researchers that I consulted in England made the observation that the Gjinn are coming through these dimensional barriers in relatively small numbers now, but their plan is to come through many more strong. And if we are unprepared, it could be very disastrous for human beings.
Men in black, what might they be?
Another form of Gjinn. And early on in my shadow people research, I couldn't help but make the connection between shadow people and men in black. Here was another link to the ET phenomena as well. Men in black are... The classic men in black are male figures dressed in dark suits and clothing, driving around in black cars often, and intimidating ET experiencers and witnesses. They have odd characteristics about them. This would be very typical of Gjinn. They're not formed completely right. They have weird things about their appearances that don't make sense, weird ways of talking and acting, like they're uncomfortable in the physical world. But they seem to know a lot about contactees and abductees. They know where they live. They know their experiences. They know where to find them. And when contact is made between men in black and an experiencer, oftentimes a whole host of paranormal things start to happen. Poltergeist effects, nightmares, dream invasions, mental oppression, apparitions, missing time, and this seems to be part of the syndrome of harassment.
You know, it's amazing. How did you get going into your research? I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start.
You know, George, the odd thing is I didn't go looking for this. It sort of found me, and I think it was research that really needed to be done. It's a lot of this started with shadow people. Now, I was familiar with Gjinn, and I've been intrigued by them for a very long time. When I was doing research in witchcraft, sorcery, Solomonic magic, and topics like that, I came across the Gjinn. And it was not until I got involved in shadow people out of my own curiosity. And, the audience prompts me. I get requests from people for help in certain situations. I'll get a tidal wave of emails all related to the same sort of thing going on, and it prompts me to do deeper investigations. And then it was a matter of just following the leads. One thread led to another. I found that the deeper I went, the more complicated it got, and the more lines of inquiry opened up that had to be examined.
Well, are you enjoying this kind of research? I mean, did you come across anything that might have frightened you that you want to tell us about?
The whole scenario is disturbing. And, my work in the paranormal and metaphysical fields, it's on both sides of the fence. I've dealt with benevolent spirits and with spiritual enlightenment and growth and contact with high-level entities who have a much different approach toward human beings, a healing, illuminating kind of approach. And, technically, well, isn't that where we'd all rather be with the good guys? But the dark side of things goes on. There is a dark underbelly to it, and it needs to be examined. So I do believe that this was a very purposeful part of my work, and that in many respects I was being directed by my own spirit guides to do this because nobody else was willing to look at it.
You've looked at the Watchers. Explain that in the relationship to the Gjinn, Rosemary.
The Watchers from the biblical story, the sons of God who were set to with the task of watching over humanity, coveted human women, left their posts, cohabited, and created the Nephilim, the monstrous cannibals. They were cannibals and vampires. They ate flesh and drank blood and spread corruption on the land. The Watchers are often described as angels, but really their behavior matches the Gjinn. And this would be characteristic of the Gjinn to have some sort of like a boss or overseer role and see what's, hey, there's something in it for us. So let's leave our posts and indulge ourselves. This would be very characteristic of Gjinn behavior. And it was a deal-making sort of thing. And the Gjinn are famous for making deals in exchange for teaching human beings the forbidden arts.
But don't they kind of renege on the deal?
Well, Gjinn will often do their bit. They will make their end of the deal, but they also want human beings to make their end of the deal back. It's a two-way street. It's not, I'm going to do favors for you just because I'm Mr. Nice Guy. Right. You're going to have to do favors for me, too. One of the things that I argue in the Gjinn Connection is that we ought to re-examine a lot of our ancient alien, ancient god, demigod encounters and experiences from the standpoint of Gjinn, because many of these beings and their behavior patterns are characteristic of Gjinn. So the Gjinn are salted in there throughout human history.
Scuttlers, what are they?
The scuttlers are a modern term for these shadow
like
creatures,
neighbors,
and they look like oily, oozy crabs. They're like shadow crabs. They were described to me by one of my UK contacts, Miles Johnston, who had worked in the broadcast profession for a good number of years and was involved in pirate radio stations during the heavy conflicts between Ireland and Northern Ireland. And these pirate radio stations would broadcast what they called intention-infused music across the border into Northern Ireland. This would be a form of thought therapy, that we infuse our music with good intentions and peace and harmony, and that this energy would be part of what would be received by the people listening to the music. Well, Miles discovered that they would have these frequent equipment breakdowns, and it seemed to center around the transmitter. So he would have to go inside the transmitter, and he got the shock of his life by opening up the equipment and seeing these forms inside, and they looked like crabs, and they would scuttle out of the way as soon as he would see them and light would hit them, much the same way that shadow people will often disappear when people look at them. They don't want to be observed for very long periods of time. These entities seem to be intrinsically involved in the breakdown of equipment, stopping one of the peace efforts. He found out over the course of time that scuttlers were in other places too. They were in England. People were seeing them, were experiencing them. These beings had the capability of literally latching on to individuals and then causing certain kinds of health problems. This sounds like another form of shadow people, which would be another form of Gjinn. Shadow people are often blobs or pillars. They're not well-defined as human forms. I have seen them shape-shift in front of me from a human-like form into an amorphous blob of black into swirling black mist that just disappears. So the scuttlers seem to be a very invasive form of this entity that gets into our electronic equipment.
Huh. Sounds like nasty-looking little creatures, huh?
And how pervasive they are, again, nobody knows. Nobody really knows. One of the things that I observed about shadow people was I had a number of cases, a whole subset. There are like these satellite patterns around the core experience of the bedroom invasion. Well, one of the satellite subsets were shadow people who seemed to be intensely interested in telecommunications, hanging around people who were taking apart salvage cell phone towers, disassembling computers, working in electronics. And they seem to be watching and observing, like wanting to know what the innards were and how things work. Well, shadow people seem to be very sensitive to electromagnetic energy and electrical fields.
They're definitely from other dimensions, Rosemary, no doubt. Rosemary Ellen Guiley's research, the Gjinn Connection. And welcome back, Rosemary Ellen Guiley. Rosemary, before we go to dreams, do you want to wrap up the Gjinn Connection for us? Put it all in perspective?
We need to be aware of who the Gjinn are and how they're interacting with us, and realize that we are sharing the planet with them. And that's the purpose of the Gjinn Connection, to educate people about how these entities are involved in so many of our encounters and experiences. They are quite likely playing very active roles in a lot of the upheaval going on the planet. They can be conjured and used for those purposes as well.
Well, you've done a remarkable job with this on the research, and I hope you keep at it, Rosemary. Good job.
Thank you.
Good job. And, of course, dreams. You've always done a good job on dreams. What got you fascinated in dreams in the first place?
Early experiences when I was a kid, my mother had a lot of precognitive dreams, and I had some paranormal experiences when I was a kid, fairies and angels. Most children have some kind of paranormal experience. But the idea that you could dream the future and it would happen, you could accurately dream the future, just astounded me when I was very young, and I wanted to know more. I wanted to learn about dreams. And when I got into my teens, I started experimenting with my dreams. I got books like, Harold Sherman was one of my early tutors, some of his work about how you can send dreams to people and how you travel in your dreams. I discovered that dreaming, in terms of our involvement in the spirit world, goes back to ancient times. So dreams became a very important avenue of exploration of the spirit world for me. And I learned how to astral travel. I never had the extent of precognitive dreaming that my mother did, which might have been a good thing because many of her dreams were about unhappy situations. But I did have other kinds of dreams, and I've realized how important they are in our daily life. They are a barometer of truth. They always reflect to us how we think we're doing in life, and they contain information to help us make decisions, make course corrections, restore balance in life. And they also are avenues for our spiritual growth as well. So I've done 6 books now on dreams, understanding dreams. My newest one is called The Pocket Dream Guide and Dictionary, and it's intended as a handbook to help people unravel the meaning of their dreams.
Rosemary, is science studying dreams? I mean, I know how they talk about, they put electrodes up to people and things, but I mean, are they really studying dreams to the point where one day we may be able to tap into the brain and actually see a dream as if we're watching a television show?
Yes, some researchers are doing that, exploring the potential for dreams to open up doorways to our untapped potential and to other realities. The ancients knew that dreams were a gateway to the spirit realms, that they were places that didn't exist here on Earth, and they were kind of in between. Plato called them the in-between state, where we could meet with the dead, with the gods and goddesses, so to speak. These experiences have continued in our dreaming life throughout history. So there are scientists who want to study the mechanisms of this, not just the chemicals that are involved in the process of dreaming, but the untapped spiritual potential and creative potential for using our dreams to maximize our intellectual powers, our creative powers, and very importantly, our healing powers.
Well, there's no question that, in the dream state, we can do some incredible things. I mean, we can solve problems. We can do just about anything. Let's talk about dreams in their various facets and what their strengths might be, Rosemary. Let's start, first of all, with precognitive dreams. What causes that? Some people do it. Some people can't.
Some people have a natural affinity for precognitive dreaming, and we don't adequately understand the mechanism why some people are inherently more psychic in many respects than other people. Now, for my mother, for example, had a variety of entity contact experiences, and she was always very unsettled by this. It was difficult for her to cope with it, even if experiences were positive. And she was born this way. My grandmother had some of that ability, too. And it manifests in different ways throughout families. For me, it was more entity contact through clairvoyance and things like that. But I have had a lot of very unusual dreaming. So anyone can learn how to develop those aspects of their dreams to at least some extent. Some people are very prolific lucid dreamers, but you can also learn how to become a lucid dreamer. The more attention you pay your dreams, the more they talk to you, the more information they give you, and the richer your dreaming life becomes.
How do you know that this precognitive dream is indeed something, a glimpse into the future? Should you record them? Should you write them down? And maybe if it happens, start paying a little bit more attention to them?
Precognitive dreams always have a different signature than ordinary dreams, and it varies by individuals. We all seem to have our own litmus test for periodic psychic dreaming. Some people will only have precognitive dreams a few times in their lifetimes, and other people will have them quite frequently. They learn over time by paying attention to their dreams, by recording them, what the signals are that distinguish precognitive dreams. Let's take the example of an airplane crash. To dream of an airplane crash is not automatically precognitive. It could be symbolic of something going on in your life, that something is crashing to earth. You've been flying too high, or you're flying in the wrong direction, or something that you thought would fly isn't going to make it. There are a lot of ways to interpret something like that. But with the right set of conditions associated with that, and also repeating dreams, precognitive dreams will often repeat, we learn to distinguish whether or not something is a harbinger of an event that's going to happen. In one of my dream books, I have the example of, I think it happened around 1980, 79 or 80. It was a DC-10 that took off from Chicago and crashed on landing. An engine fell off, and hundreds of people were killed. Well, there was a man who dreamed of this event almost every night for a couple of weeks before it happened, and he knew that he was seeing the future, that this was going to happen. The problem was he didn't know where, when, and what airline, and that's often the case with precognitive dreams. We're missing key elements that help us determine exactly what's going to happen.
How does it work? I mean, how in God's name, Rosemary, can someone, whether it's a remote viewer or a precognitive dreamer, tap into the future when it hasn't even happened yet? Maybe it has.
In the sense of eternal time, it's already taken place. And in our reality, these are forces in motion. There are circumstances, choices, all sorts of things that contribute to an event. They become forces in motion. And things can impact this. Things can divert forces in motion. They can magnify them. And events that take place, at some point, they reach a critical mass. Just like an airplane taking off, it reaches a critical speed, it has to take off. So forces in motion reach a critical mass where the event actually then takes place in physical reality. Some people have the ability to tune into these forces in motion. Now, a lot of times when people have attempted to do studies of precognitive dreams and even do things like premonitions bureau, like let's collect all our precognitive dreams to avert disasters, people might actually be dreaming of probable events that never make it because something intervenes before critical mass happens. That's my own theory on it, and I see that pattern of activity in studying the nature of precognitive dreams.
Now, let's talk about lucid dreaming. Of course, a lucid dream is a dream where you know you're dreaming. So what's the significance of that?
We don't understand the full value of lucid dreaming, which is knowing you're dreaming while you're dreaming. And sometimes that's all you get is you suddenly realize that you're in a dream. Other times you have the ability to manipulate the dream, to decide what you're going to do. You're not just a passive player in your own dream, as most people are most of the time. You are directing the dream. You decide where you're going to go, what you're going to do, if you're going to stop something, start something. Many researchers believe that this kind of dreaming has tremendous potential for tapping into creative and healing powers. And these are the kinds of dreams that have been under intense study for decades now, in terms of can we harness this energy? Can we teach ourselves how to lucidly dream? This may be a function, an evolutionary function, that more and more humans are going to literally be born into. I have met individuals who are prolific lucid dreamers. I mean, every night they are capable of having lucid dreams, and yet other people might only have them every now and then.
Now, with these dreams, these lucid dreams, the fact that you're in a dream and you know you're dreaming, and if you can control the outcome of the dream, how does that affect you in your real life, or does it?
It may help us harness our powers of intuition for making decisions. Dreams seem to tap into a very deep level of our awareness, the higher self, which is like a radar sweep that's constantly looking out into the timescape for events that are shaping up, for decisions that we're going to have to make. And lucid dreaming seems to tap into that particular sweep of the timescape. So if we learn how to lucid dream, perhaps we are then better in touch with our intuition. We can make better decisions for ourselves. We can get in touch with our spiritual guidance, which manifests to different people in different ways, sometimes through the personalities of spirit guides, and other times through being more in touch with our higher self, with our own deep intuition.
What do you call the dreams, Rosemary, that allow you to accomplish goals and objectives? Is there any specific name for it?
Those are commonly called dream incubation or dream programming, and these are techniques that have been employed since ancient times to really put dreams to work for us. Before we go to sleep, we can instruct our dreaming mind to address a question, to give us the answer to a decision that we need to make, to point us in the right direction, to reveal a solution, to help us find a way to heal something in our lives, whether it's a physical illness or a life that's been, shredded by bad, disasters and bad luck.
Night terrors.
Night terrors take a variety of forms, disturbing dreams, nightmarish dreams to people where in some cases they might be pursued by dark forms, by dark people, and sometimes these dreams repeat, and they often contain the start of a profound healing process. Sometimes disturbing dreams are related to medical conditions, to psychological states, stress disorders and things like that. Sometimes they contain the start of a healing process, and they're disturbing because the dreaming self really needs to get our attention to address something that's way out of balance.
Are the night terrors tied into sleep paralysis or that old hag syndrome, Rosemary?
Yes, and it is possible for entities to interact with our dreams as well. And there are types of night terror dreams in which we are paralyzed. We sort of wake up into a limbo state where we're not fully awake, but we're not asleep either, and we're unable to move. While there is some horrible presence in the room. Now, we do go through natural states of paralysis while we're asleep and dreaming, but those particular kinds of dreams are related to disturbing entity visitations. I've come across those conditions in shadow people visits, in other kinds of, demonic sorts of cases where people are being oppressed by a malevolent spirit. Sometimes people can actually employ dreams as curses. to send entities to invade us while we're vulnerable during sleep, to cause nightmarish situations. So dream invasion is a real kind of dream, and sometimes we have dream invasions just by sleeping in negatively energetic places, haunted locations, and other times they're entities that have somehow zeroed in on us and are in the process of manipulating us in some way.
A dream that you're falling, what does that mean? Your career's over? You're dying? What is that?
It's one of the most common kinds of dreams, falling. And it's often an anxiety dream that we have when we're going through difficult times in life, where these dreams are often related to times when we feel we're just not in control of things. And it's often a horrible feeling in a dream to be in a free fall. There's a bit of folklore that holds that if you hit bottom in your dream, it means you're going to die. But this is more just a superstition than anything else. Plenty of people hit bottom in a falling dream, and they get a shock or a jolt, but it's not a harbinger of doom by any means. But if someone has repeated falling dreams, examine what's going on in your life where you're feeling out of control. It could be at work, could be at a relationship, it could be literally being at sea over making a major decision about something.
So I had a dream that people kept coming into my house that I didn't know, and they never would leave. And they kept coming and coming and coming. I even called 911. The cops never came. It was one of the most frustrating dreams I've ever had, Rosemary. What would you say about something like that?
If that were my dream, I would look at it in terms of my space and my time being invaded by things I can't control. And that's what these unknown people are. They're invading my home, which is symbolic of one's environment where we're supposed to have total control over our home.
Right.
Outside forces, the cops who are being called, outside forces have no impact on this. So the dream would be telling me that no one's going to help me get a handle on something that I need to get control of. Other people are impacting me in ways that could be time invasions, people asking me to do things that are not in my best interest, but taking up my space.
All right, Rosemary, let's come back in just a moment. We'll continue talking about the dream state. I want to ask you about when two people separately have about the same dream. They're sharing the same dream. How does that happen? More to come with Rosemary Ellen Guiley on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back. Rosemary Ellen Guiley with us as we're talking about dreams and the Gjinn Connection as well, which is a spooky, spooky thing. I do have to ask you about a dream, and then I want to bounce back and forth a little bit this half hour, Rosemary, between these two subjects. But if somebody dreams of someone else and that other person dreams of that person, what is that? How are they doing that?
It's called mutual dreaming or shared dreaming, and seems to be a natural function of dreaming. It's probably more prevalent than we realize because most of the time we don't discuss our dreams with other people. But in some cultures, shared dreaming is not only common, it's expected that if you're connected to someone in an intimate way, or you're part of a family or a culture, a society, you would share the dreamscape with them the same way you would share the daily life environment. So sometimes we have shared dreams just as a demonstration of this connection. A shared dream could be the exact dream. It could have the same theme or the same elements. Sometimes shared dreams are just two people dreaming of each other on the same night in similar circumstances. And there may be elements of lucidity to it, too. Just like lucid dreams, shared dreams seem to be an advanced dreaming power that is probably part of our spiritual evolutionary track. we're going to have more and more of this as we evolve our consciousness.
Rosemary, if someone has such a horrible dream, frightening dream, could they die of a heart attack in their sleep?
George, I don't know, but I have heard stories of people who have awakened in absolute terror from dreams with the heart pounding. And technically, is it possible to be scared to death? Yes, it is. These sorts of things do happen.
I mean, how do we know, for example, that some of these many cases of heart attacks in one sleep aren't caused by something like that? We just don't know.
Well, some of them might very well be. And in fact, from a magical perspective, if you were attempting to do something detrimental to a person through their dreams, that would be one avenue, that you would send them a horrifying dream or an entity that would be able to physically attack them and harm them during their sleep. These sorts of concepts do exist in the magical literature.
Well, they sure do. Now, back to the Gjinn for a little bit. You also talk about a connection with reptilians, so explain that a little bit more.
The reptilian is a common presence in the ET abduction scenario, and then we also have a lot of beliefs about reptilian races who live underneath the earth. Some of them are said to be extraterrestrial. We have creation stories about reptilian entities emerging from the earth to populate the planet. Reptilians are involved in the fall of human beings, the serpent, and the story of Adam and Eve. And the snake and reptile form are the most common form taken by the Gjinn. And so there's an interesting connection there, again, linking the Gjinn to the ET abduction phenomenon. Conspiracy theories also get much deeper into the reptilian forms as well, that they're tied in with Illuminati and world conspiracy organizations. Some people believe that the reptilians are actually beneficial, that are benevolent. Here again, I don't think we can categorize any entity as all one disposition or the other, all good or all bad. I have interviewed people who've had terrifying encounters with humanoid reptilian beings, and I've interviewed people who've had encounters with reptilians that they feel are here to mingle among us, to be of help to us, to help us come into our full fruition of powers and creativity.
Well, the research that you've done into this is fantastic. It really is. Are you concerned that you might have conjured any of these up to come and get you?
I have had encounters with unpleasant entities that are directly connected to my research. And yes, once you get on the radar, you never get off. And I have attracted the attention of beings who really do not want a whole lot of information about them out there. I have not been harassed to a large extent, knock on wood. I feel I have a lot of spiritual protection around me. I also have a very healthy respect for these entities, and I am attempting to understand them and their perspectives and their motives from their point of view as they engage with human beings. So I don't automatically consider them to be evil. There might be hostile ones, but that doesn't make them necessarily evil. So do I have troubling encounters? Yes, I do. I have from time to time had bedroom invasions by shadow people. I've had unpleasant things happen in my life that one would attribute to spirit interference, and sometimes it's difficult to make the call on that. But when a spate of things happen that follow a time when I've been doing a lot of intensive research, it's hard to ignore those connections. Sometimes when I've undertaken investigations of cases, I've had interference that seems to be for the purpose of blocking the investigation. Things happen to people to stop things, to cause things to be planned again. I've had a few physical marks on the body that seem to be retribution, scratches and a bleeding cut or two. And it just sort of goes with the territory. There are times when I feel it's not prudent for me to go into a particular area, so to speak, of a line of inquiry. I need to back off for a while, and you have to learn, when it's time to hold them and when it's time to fold them.
I find it fascinating, though, that you believe that the Gjinn are responsible for most of these kinds of activities that we've had on this planet.
The evidence points in that direction. And once I started factoring the Gjinn into a lot of equations, even haunting investigations, a lot of things started making sense. And so, of course, I went out and consulted a lot of my colleagues in the field. Have you come across this? What is your explanation? Have you considered? And they were coming up against the same thing, like hauntings that involved a lot of very detrimental effects on people. Their health would be affected, mental oppression as well. Cases would not resolve. Shadow people were often a key component of that. And a lot of times a whole multitude of forms would be assaulting people. And I believe that the Gjinn can account for them all. I've had cases where I think a single Gjinn has accounted for a dozen or more manifestations, all of which were aimed at tormenting and harassing people. So factoring the Gjinn in suddenly made sense in a lot of cases that defied explanation and defied resolution. And then following these other trails into the other areas of the cryptids, the abduction scenarios, people with missing time, missing people. Some of these individuals might be persons who fall through interdimensional doorways and don't make it back, or they get kidnapped by entities and don't make it back.
You've got a segment on David Jacobs, who believes that ET visitations are not very benevolent at all. Tell me what you uncovered there.
Well, I do agree with David Jacobs that the abduction scenario is detrimental to human beings. And in the Gjinn Connection, I comment on the works of other researchers and ways in which the Gjinn have showed up in the documentation that they've accumulated. And in so doing, I do make the point that I'm not saying that their own interpretations are right or wrong, just that I see evidence for the Gjinn in the testimonies and documentation they've done, and this needs to be brought into a better light. But here again, we find many similarities between the Gjinn and the kinds of things that David Jacobs has discovered, like the hybrid program, Gjinn entities, which could be Gjinn that attach to people for life. They're like companions that attach to a person early in life and age along with them and then become involved in a deeper relationship with them, and also the abduction scenario. And that these sorts of activities are for a purpose of infiltration. And we don't always know exactly what they're up to and why, but why would you infiltrate a population? You would want to subjugate them. You'd want to take them over. Perhaps you'd want to eliminate them. So the evidence is there, and researchers have dug it out for the ETs. And we also need to realize that the Gjinn are among the entities who are participating in this.
All right, let's go to the phones east of the Rockies. Lawrence in Dallas, Texas. Hi, Lawrence. Go ahead.
Hi. It's a great show tonight. My brain is on fire again.
Good.
This subject is really interesting, and what I'll say is that I've had some strange personal experiences. I had a very oppressive dream a couple of times, and I've come to believe that the Gjinn and the archons are similar, if not the same, and that they're parasitical, essentially, on the human race just to get, bad reactions from them, etc. And I believe that they're constantly, as you say, infiltrating and wishing to oppress. But I want to say that I think that the greatest defense against them is to be able to discern when you have a thought in your mind that is not your own, and then be able to say, well, that's not really something that I would normally think of, and then sort of segregate that and realize that maybe something is trying to get you to do something that you wouldn't normally do.
What do you think of that, Rosemary?
That's very good advice. Entities do have the capability of invading our thoughts and manipulating thoughts, and sometimes we're not very aware of that. I do have a chapter in the book where I discuss the archons and how well they fit the Gjinn template, and that many of these beings that we've engaged with throughout our history can be reinterpreted as Gjinn. They have the traits and characteristics the archons do, the Nephilim, the Watchers, the Anunnaki. Many of the gods, the early gods who had hybrid forms, could be Gjinn. And this points to a very significant involvement of a manipulative entity who's been part of our development from the very beginning. So, yes, self-awareness, being master of your own thoughts, your consciousness, pursuing a path of meditation and spiritual growth, very important to our autonomy. At the end of the Gjinn Connection, I have a chapter called the Battle for Humanity, which is, how do we combat these sorts of things? And some of the protection measures are taken from the ET abduction community. And Druffel was very good at interviewing people about what worked for them. And I've interviewed Gjinn contactees as well. And some of the things that work the best in the long run are not Band-Aid kind of treatments, but what we call up from within ourselves, our own spiritual strength, our own sense of autonomy, what Druffel calls righteous anger, and I've used that myself in repelling unwanted presences. Righteous anger, sovereignty, recognizing that we have sovereignty, and we have the right to autonomy, and because other beings who seem to be more powerful than us attempt to manipulate us does not mean we should give over our authority and power to them. So there is a lot of self-awareness in this kind of approach, and that's really what's going to make the big difference in the long run.
Rosemary, with all these potential problems with the Gjinn, you would think we'd find a way to repel them. We haven't, have we?
There are many ways that are very effective for repelling them, but the problem is none of them work in 100% of the cases 100% of the time. We're dealing with very clever entities of different motivations, different power abilities, and of course human beings vary quite a bit in their ability to combat something as well. So a remedy that works very well for one person may not work at all for another. There are simple remedies, like with shadow people. They're often affected by the EMF and electrical energy in an environment. Leaving lights on, computers, televisions can interfere with their ability to manifest. People have used all kinds of religious invocations and prayers All religions have ways of dealing with unwanted spirit presences. They're all effective, but they're not effective in all cases. Oftentimes we have to experiment to find something. Now, when we use religious remedies, we're also calling up our own spiritual strength, and that's very important as well. When we ask for help of God or religious figures, we are connecting with them in a very deep way, and that helps us bring up our own defenses too.